I stood at the entrance of the Portland Maternity Center, holding my newborn daughter against my chest, feeling the weight of the rain as much as the weight of my own life collapsing. My arms trembled, not from exhaustion after hours of labor, but from fear of what would happen now that Jason was gone. I had called him 3 times that morning, begging him to come, telling him it was finally time for us to go home. But each call went to voicemail. Each unanswered ring hollowed me out until my voice cracked into silence. Lila, just 3 days old, shifted slightly under the thin hospital blanket. Her tiny lips opened, searching for warmth, unaware of the chaos unraveling around us. I kissed her forehead, whispering, "It's okay, baby, we're going to be okay." But my voice sounded foreign, as if I were talking to someone else's child, someone else's life. I had nowhere to go. Our apartment lease ended this month, and Jason, my husband, the man who promised to stand by me, had disappeared without a trace. The rain soaked my shoes, cold seeping through every layer, while people rushed past, busy with their own lives. I wanted to disappear among them, just another face under the gray Oregon sky. Instead, I stayed rooted on the steps, paralyzed. My whole body was screaming to move, but my heart was broken beyond motion. "Excuse me," the voice was deep, warm, unexpected. I looked up to see a man, older, maybe in his early 50s, wearing a charcoal suit despite the rain. His silver hair was damp, but his posture was strong, steady, like he belonged anywhere he stood. He held an umbrella and looked at me with genuine concern. "Are you all right? Do you need help?" For a moment, pride made me want to say no, to claim I could handle this alone. But then Lila whimpered, tiny fists clenching, and I felt my knees weaken. I whispered, "My ride, it never came." The man glanced around, then back at me. "Let me call one for you, or better yet, let me drive you. I promise I'm safe." He hesitated, as though aware of how this might sound to a woman clutching her baby. "Name's Daniel Whitaker. I'm local." He reached into his pocket and handed me a business card. Thick paper, elegant font, the kind successful people carried. I stared at it, still clutching Lila. My instincts screamed to keep distance, but something in his voice, something steady and calm, cut through the noise in my head. The rain picked up, drumming harder against the steps. I nodded slowly. "Okay, thank you." That was the moment everything began to change. I thought I had lost everything that morning. But in reality, I was about to find something I didn't even know I was missing. Jason wasn't always like this, not in the beginning. I met him 3 years ago when I was working as a cashier at a small electronics store in downtown Portland. He had walked in on a rainy Thursday, just like the one outside the maternity ward, shaking droplets from his hair and flashing that easy smile that made people trust him instantly. He had asked about headphones, but he stayed to ask about me, where I grew up, what music I liked, what I dreamed about. It felt safe. For someone like me, raised by a single grandmother after my mom passed too soon, safety was a luxury. Jason offered it without me even having to ask. We started dating quickly. Jason was funny, ambitious, and always talking about the life we would build one day. A little house with a garden, maybe a dog, and Sunday mornings making pancakes together. 6 months in, he proposed. He didn't have a ring ready, just this ridiculous twist tie he pulled from a loaf of bread in our kitchen. But I cried and said yes anyway. Love didn't need a ring to feel real. The first year was blissful. We had an apartment that smelled of fresh coffee every morning, and Jason would leave me notes on the fridge. "Good luck at work. Dinner's on me tonight. Love you." When I found out I was pregnant, he spun me around the living room and laughed until we both collapsed on the couch, dizzy and happy. "We're going to be parents," he whispered against my hair. "I promise I'll take care of everything." For a while, he kept that promise. He came to every appointment, held my hand through every wave of nausea, and built a crib from scratch, even though he barely knew how to use a drill. But around the 5th month, things started changing slowly, almost unnoticeably at first. He started working late, missing dinners, forgetting the little things he used to remember, like buying milk or calling when he'd be late. He snapped more easily, blaming stress, talking about some big deal at work that would solve everything. I believed him, wanted to believe him, because I was already terrified about becoming a mom. Then I found the receipt. It was tucked in his jacket pocket, one I'd grabbed from the chair to put in the closet. A fancy restaurant, one we'd never been to together, 2 expensive cocktails and 2 desserts. There was also a single blonde hair caught in the collar of his coat. My hair is dark brown, almost black. I stared at it for a long time, convincing myself it was nothing. Maybe a coworker, maybe a client. He couldn't. When I asked, he looked annoyed instead of guilty. Are we really doing this, Em? You're pregnant and hormonal. And now I can't even take a client to dinner. He kissed my forehead like he was soothing a child. I love you. Stop worrying. I tried. I really did. I'd baked more of his favorite meals. Told him I appreciated how hard he was working. Even when he came home, late smelling like perfume I'd known. He'd hold me sometimes at night, whispering half-asleep apologies for being distracted. And for a moment, I'd let myself believe things could go back to what they were. But deep down, I felt the shift. There was distance in his eyes, like he was living somewhere else entirely and I wasn't invited. One night, about 3 weeks before my due date, he came home late again, soaked from the rain. I had been pacing with swollen feet, terrified something was wrong. Where were you? I asked softly. He tossed his keys into the bowl and said, "Traffic. Relax." His voice was sharp, final, like a slammed door. Then, as if rehearsed, he said, "Maybe after the baby's here, we should move in with my mom for a while. Save some money, you know." I stared at him, confused. "You said we'd get a bigger place, that we'd manage on our own." "Yeah, well, things change, Em." He poured himself a beer and didn't look at me. That was the moment I knew something was breaking. I just didn't know how soon it would shatter completely. And by the time Lila was born, I would learn exactly how fragile promises could be. Labor was nothing like what I had imagined. Movies make it look like a few loud screams, and then suddenly you're holding your baby, glowing and beautiful. In reality, it was 12 hours of pain that twisted through my spine and clenched my chest until I could barely breathe. By the end, my voice was hoarse from biting back screams, and every muscle in my body trembled as if I'd run a marathon barefoot. Jason was there at the start, standing awkwardly near the bed with his hands shoved in his pockets. "You're doing great, Em," he kept saying, like a coach who didn't know the rules of the game. But after the first few hours, he drifted to the corner, scrolling on his phone, leaving me to clutch the bed rail alone when each contraction hit. I wanted to tell him to hold my hand, to tell me everything would be okay, but pride kept me silent. Then came the final push. A cry ripped from me that didn't even sound human. And in that moment, I thought I couldn't do it, that my body would fail me. But then there was another cry, smaller, higher, one that silenced the entire room. Our daughter was here. When the nurse placed her on my chest, all the pain vanished like it had never been there. Her skin was warm and slick, her tiny fingers curling instinctively around mine. "Lila!" I whispered, naming her the way I'd practiced alone on quiet nights when Jason worked late. "Welcome to the world, baby girl." Jason stepped closer, his eyes softening for the first time in months. He touched Lila's little hand with one finger and whispered, "She's so small." For a brief second, I saw the man I married, the man who once spun me around our living room when we learned I was pregnant. He smiled at me, and for that moment, I believed maybe, just maybe, we could be a family again. The next 3 days at the hospital were a blur of feedings, diaper changes, and endless exhaustion. Jason came and went, blaming work calls and urgent errands. I tried to understand. Maybe he was overwhelmed. Maybe he needed space. I told myself once we were home, things would settle, and we'd figure it out together. I even caught myself daydreaming. Sunday mornings with Lila gurgling in a bassinet while Jason and I made pancakes, just like he'd always said. I thought about how maybe we'd laugh about all the arguments, about how hard pregnancy had been and how love would somehow stitch everything back together. But somewhere deep down, that quiet voice I'd ignored for months whispered a warning. He's already gone. Emily, he's been gone for a while. I brushed it aside, clutching my newborn close, focusing on the hope rather than the fear. After all, I told myself, he had been there when she was born, hadn't he? He had smiled at her. He had smiled at me. Maybe that was enough to start over. Maybe love, even fractured love, could be healed. Or at least that's what I believed then. The morning of our discharge was cold and gray, typical for Portland in early spring. A thin drizzle coated the hospital windows, blurring the parking lot beyond. I dressed Lila in the soft pink onesie I'd packed weeks earlier, carefully tucking her tiny arms through the sleeves, marveling at how impossibly delicate she felt. "We're going home, baby," I whispered, forcing a smile. Jason was supposed to be there at 9 a.m. sharp. I had texted him twice that morning, even called once, but there was no reply. I told myself he was on his way, stuck in traffic, or grabbing something for the baby. Still, each passing minute pressed heavier on my chest. By 10 a.m., every other new mom in the ward had been picked up by excited husbands or parents. I stood near the entrance, rocking Lila gently as the nurse wheeled out the last patient. "Is someone coming for you, honey?" she asked kindly. "Yes, my husband. He's just running late," I said, my voice too bright, too practiced. She smiled softly, the kind of smile you give someone when you're not sure they believe their own words, and returned to her station. At 10:30, I called again, straight to voicemail. My heart sank as dread coiled in my stomach. Something was wrong, or maybe something had been wrong for longer than I wanted to admit. Finally, I asked the nurse if I could wait outside. The rain had picked up, tapping against the awning like impatient fingers. I stood under it, clutching Lila close, scanning every car that pulled in. None of them were Jason's. By 11, I couldn't ignore it any longer. I borrowed the hospital phone and called the company where Jason worked. A woman answered cheerfully, "Bright Tech Solutions, how can I help you?" "Hi, this is Emily Hartman. I'm trying to reach Jason Hartman. He works in sales." There was a pause, just long enough to make my stomach knot. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Jason Hartman no longer works here. He resigned about 3 weeks ago." The world tilted. 3 weeks? He'd been leaving for work every morning, suit and all, kissing my forehead, telling me he'd call if he was running late, and all that time he hadn't even had a job? My grip tightened on Lila, who stirred and whimpered at the tension in my arms. "Thank you," I managed, hanging up before the woman could say more. I stepped back outside, numb, the drizzle soaking through my jacket. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, but all I could do was stand there, silent and hollow. That was when a voice broke through the fog. "Are you all right?" I looked up and saw the man from before, Daniel Whitaker. He held an umbrella, the same concerned expression on his face. "You look pale. Do you need help?" I hesitated, pride clawing at me. "My ride never came," I admitted, my voice small. Daniel studied me for a moment, then glanced at Lila. "You just had a baby, didn't you?" He didn't wait for me to answer. "You shouldn't be standing out here in the cold. Let me give you a ride." Instinct screamed at me not to accept rides from strangers. But Daniel didn't feel like a stranger. Not exactly. There was something steady, almost familiar, about him. He pulled out a business card and handed it to me. "Daniel Whitaker. I own a chain of restaurants here in Oregon. Call any of those numbers if you want to confirm who I am." I stared at the card, then at Lila, who was starting to cry softly against my chest. The rain was heavier now, soaking through the blanket around her. I swallowed my pride and nodded. "Okay, thank you." He smiled gently, taking the diaper bag from my shoulder without asking, careful not to crowd me. "My car's right there. I'll keep the heater on high." As we walked to his car, I thought about Jason, about every lie he must have told over the last 3 weeks. A chill ran through me, colder than the rain. I had left the hospital thinking I had a husband waiting for me. Instead, I had nothing, or at least that's what I thought. Because that day, a stranger with silver hair and kind eyes stepped into the emptiness Jason left behind, and nothing in my life would ever be the same. The drive out of Portland felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life through a fogged-up window. Lila slept in her car seat, her tiny chest rising and falling in a rhythm that made my heart ache with both love and fear. I sat rigid, clutching the strap of my diaper bag, trying to ignore the gnawing voice inside my head. What am I doing? Getting into a car with a stranger? But Daniel didn't feel like a stranger. He didn't fill the silence with awkward chatter or invasive questions. Instead, he just drove, the windshield wipers beating a steady rhythm while the heater hummed warm air into the cabin. After a while, he glanced at me and said quietly, "You look like you haven't slept in days." I laughed under my breath, a sound brittle enough to break. "I haven't, but that's normal, right?" He nodded, eyes still on the road. "Normal, yes. Easy, no. When my son was born, I didn't sleep for a week straight." He smiled faintly, almost wistfully, then let the silence settle again. We left the city behind and wound through open country, vineyards stretching across the rolling hills of Willamette Valley. It was beautiful, the kind of beautiful you only notice when life slows down long enough to let you breathe. I hadn't breathed in months. When the car turned onto a private gravel driveway flanked by tall oak trees, I blinked in confusion. "This is where you live?" I asked. Daniel nodded. "For 25 years now. Built it with my own hands, back when I thought I'd spend my life raising a big family here." There was no bitterness in his voice, just quiet fact. The house that came into view was like something out of a magazine. 2 stories, brick with wide porches, surrounded by gardens still sleeping through early spring. A golden retriever bounded toward the car, tail wagging wildly, and Daniel smiled. "That's Max. He's harmless, just loud." I unbuckled Lila, clutching her to my chest as the dog sniffed curiously at my feet. "You don't have to do this," I said softly. "I can find a motel or something. I don't want to impose." Daniel shook his head. "Emily, you just had a baby. You don't need a motel. You need a warm bed and someone to help watch out for you while you get on your feet." He gestured toward the porch. "Come inside. Meet the rest of the family before you decide." Inside, the house smelled faintly of cedar and something warm, maybe cinnamon. A woman, maybe in her late 50s, stepped out from the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron. "Alina," Daniel introduced. "She runs the house and keeps us all alive." Alina's eyes softened when she saw Lila. "Oh, you poor thing, you look exhausted. Come on, I'll show you to a guest room." Before I could protest, another figure appeared in the hallway, a tall man in his late 20s with Daniel's sharp jawline, but none of his warmth. He glanced from me to the baby, his expression guarded. "Dad, what's going on?" Daniel sighed lightly. "Ethan, this is Emily Hartman. She's going to stay here for a little while." Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. "Stay here? With a newborn?" Daniel's voice took on a tone I hadn't heard yet. Firm, not unkind, but final. "It's temporary. Emily just needs a safe place. That's all." Ethan didn't argue further, just muttered, "Right. Temporary," before walking out onto the porch. I felt my cheeks burn, wishing I could disappear. "I shouldn't be here." Daniel turned to me, steady and calm. "You should. Don't worry about Ethan. He's protective of the house, but he'll come around. Give him time." Alina guided me upstairs to a cozy guest room with a quilted bedspread and a crib already waiting in the corner. I froze, staring at it. You had a crib?" Alina smiled. "This house has seen babies before. We keep it around for guests." I placed Lila in the crib and stood there, tears stinging my eyes because for the first time since leaving the hospital I felt safe enough to cry. Daniel stood quietly in the doorway, not intruding, just there. "Thank you," I whispered, not looking at him. He nodded once. Get some rest. We'll talk later. You're safe here, Emily. I promise. And for reasons I couldn't explain, I believed him. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the wide windows of the guest room, catching the edges of the old quilt and warming Lila's tiny face where she slept in the crib. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, I woke up feeling rested. Not whole, but not broken either. Alina appeared at the door with a gentle knock. Breakfast is ready, dear. You should eat while it's hot. Downstairs, the smell of freshly baked bread and coffee filled the air. Daniel sat at the end of a long wooden table, reading something on a tablet. He looked up when I entered, offering a warm smile. Morning. How's our newest little guest? She slept better than I expected, I admitted, pulling out a chair. Honestly, so did I. That's good. You need it, Daniel said simply, before gesturing toward the food. Eat as much as you want. Alina made too much, as usual. Halfway through breakfast, another figure appeared. Ethan, Daniel's son. He gave me a polite nod, but said nothing as he poured himself coffee. The awkwardness clung to the air like humidity before a storm. I cleared my throat, wanting to fill the silence. Thank you for letting me stay here. I promise it's only temporary. I'll start looking for an apartment this week and… Daniel shook his head, his voice gentle but firm. Emily, you just gave birth 3 days ago. Take your time. No one is rushing you out. I nodded, but still felt that need to contribute, to prove I wasn't a burden. Later that day, while Alina rocked Lila in the living room, I wandered into the kitchen and started baking. My grandmother had taught me everything she knew about bread and pastries, and my hands found comfort in the familiar rhythm of kneading dough. When Daniel came in, following the warm, yeasty smell, he stopped short. That smells incredible. What is it? Just a simple sourdough loaf, I said, brushing flour off my hands. I used to bake all the time before. Well, before life got complicated. Daniel stepped closer, studying the loaf on the counter. You know, I own a chain of restaurants. Lately, we've been struggling to figure out what's missing, how to make people feel like they're eating at home, not just another place to grab food. This, he gestured to the bread, this is what people want. Real food. Food made with love. I laughed nervously. Are you saying you want to serve my bread in your restaurants? Why not? You clearly have talent. And if you're interested, I could use your help redesigning our menu. Something more soulful. The idea was overwhelming, yet strangely exciting. For months, I'd felt invisible, even before Jason walked out. Now someone was looking right at me, seeing what I could do, not just what I had lost. Over the next week, I cooked more often, preparing hearty soups, flaky pies, and recipes my grandmother used to make. Daniel tasted everything, sometimes closing his eyes like he was trying to memorize each bite. One evening, after a dinner of roasted chicken and homemade biscuits, he leaned back in his chair and said quietly, You know, Emily, you could run your own kitchen if you wanted. You have that touch. I blushed, shaking my head. I'm just trying to repay your kindness. You don't need to repay me, he said softly. But maybe consider this. Sometimes the best way to heal is to build something new. Slowly, the house started to feel less like someone else's space and more like a refuge. Sophie, Ethan's wife, visited one afternoon, immediately doting on Lila and chatting with me like we'd known each other for years. Even Ethan, though still cautious, softened when he saw how happy his wife was to help. One evening, he even stopped by the kitchen while I was baking and said, quietly, The bread's good. Thanks for dinner. It wasn't much, but it felt like progress. In quiet moments, I'd take Lila outside to the vineyard behind the house. The rows of grapevines stretched endlessly, their buds just beginning to wake for spring. Standing there with my daughter in my arms, breathing in the crisp Oregon air, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't known in months. I still didn't know how long I'd stay or where life was leading me, but one thing was certain. I was no longer frozen on the steps of that hospital. I was moving forward, one loaf of bread, one small act of rebuilding at a time. And somewhere in the background of all that rebuilding, Daniel was quietly becoming more than just the man who gave me a ride home. He was becoming family. It was Daniel who suggested the trip. "You mentioned your grandmother lives out near McMinnville, right?" he asked one evening as he helped clear the dinner table. "Why don't we go visit her? She should meet her great-granddaughter." The thought warmed me. My grandmother, Margaret Evans, had raised me after my mom passed when I was just 3. She was the only family I had left, at least. That's what I believed. "That would be nice," I said quietly, though nerves twisted in my stomach. I hadn't told Grandma the full truth about Jason leaving. I wasn't sure I could say it out loud yet. 2 days later, we loaded Lila into Daniel's SUV and headed south. The closer we got to McMinnville, the more memories came rushing back. Long summer days in Grandma's garden, the smell of her famous apple pies, the way she'd hum old hymns while knitting on the porch. By the time we pulled into her driveway, tears stung my eyes. Grandma stepped out, as spry as ever despite her silver hair and 70-plus years. "Emily!" she cried, wrapping me in an embrace. When she pulled back to look at Lila, her eyes softened. "Oh, my sweet girl, she looks just like you did." Daniel stayed politely in the background, holding the diaper bag, until Grandma's eyes landed on him. She froze. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, in a trembling voice, she whispered, "Daniel Whitaker, is that you?" I blinked in confusion. "You two know each other?" Daniel's face changed, like a man seeing a ghost. "Margaret, it's been a long time." Grandma pressed a hand to her mouth, looking at me, then back at him. "Emily, sweetie, did he tell you who he is?" Something in my chest tightened. "He's the man who helped me at the hospital. He's been letting me stay at his house until I figure things out." Grandma sank onto the porch step, her eyes wide, almost fearful. "Lord have mercy," she whispered. "Emily, Daniel knew your mother." I frowned. "My mom? You mean when she was little?" Daniel's voice was low, almost hoarse. "No, not when she was little. When she was grown. Your mother and we were close for a while. Before I left for Portland to start my business." He paused, meeting Grandma's gaze. "Margaret, did she ever tell you?" Grandma's eyes filled with tears. "She told me after you left, after she realized she was expecting." My breath caught. "Expecting? Are you saying—" Daniel stepped closer, his expression torn between hope and regret. "Emily, your mother, and I were together. I didn't know she was pregnant when I left. I never got a call, never a letter. I didn't know you existed until I saw you at that hospital, and something about you felt so familiar." The world tilted the same way it had when I learned Jason had left me. Only this time, the ground wasn't falling away. It was splitting open, showing me something I didn't know how to process. "You're saying—" I swallowed hard. "You're saying you're my father?" Daniel nodded slowly, pain flickering across his face. "Yes, and if I'd known, I never would have left. Emily, I am so sorry." I stumbled back, clutching Lila tighter. No, this can't be real. My father died before I was born. That's what Mom always said." Grandma's voice was soft but steady. "Honey, we told you that because your mother wanted to protect you. Daniel had a fiancé in Portland when he left. Your mom didn't want to ruin his life. She thought it was better if you never knew." The words hit like cold water, each one a betrayal wrapped in good intentions. My entire life had been built on a story that wasn't true. "I need some air," I whispered, turning away and walking down the gravel path, ignoring Daniel calling after me. My feet carried me blindly until I reached a small wooden footbridge over the creek where I used to play as a child. I stood there, holding Lila close, shaking so hard I thought I'd drop her. Daniel appeared moments later, rain misting his hair. "Emily, please." "I didn't know. If I had known, I would have been there. I would have raised you." I spun on him, tears streaming down my face. And what? You think this makes everything okay now? That you can just swoop in after all these years and play hero because I look like someone you loved once? His face crumpled. No, I don't expect forgiveness. I just want a chance to know you, to be there for you and for your daughter, to make up for time I didn't even know I'd lost. I stared at him, my chest rising and falling too fast, heart pounding in my ears. I don't know if I can do this, I whispered. I don't know if I can believe any of this. But even as I said it, I couldn't ignore the part of me that wanted to believe, wanted family, wanted roots, wanted something solid after everything Jason had taken away. For the first time in my life, I wasn't sure who I was anymore or who I could be, now that the truth had changed everything. I didn't sleep that night, even after we returned from Grandma's house, after Daniel had offered to give me space, after Alina had quietly taken Lila so I could rest. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying every word from earlier. My father, he's my father. For years, I had accepted being alone. My mom had died so young, my grandmother had done her best, and Jason had been the closest thing I had to family, until he abandoned me too. Now I had a man telling me he was my father, a man who didn't even know I existed, and who had stepped in to help me when I had nothing. By morning, exhaustion had settled deep in my bones. Daniel was already in the kitchen, quietly drinking coffee when I came down holding Lila. He looked up, hesitant, like he wasn't sure if I'd turn around and leave. Can we talk? He asked softly. I nodded and sat across from him, clutching Lila like a shield. Emily, he began, his hands clasped tightly on the table. I can't undo the past. I didn't know about you, and if I had, I would have been there. But I'm here now, and I want to be part of your life. No expectations, no conditions. Just let me know you, and let me know my granddaughter. His words cracked something open in me. Part of me wanted to scream, to throw every year of loneliness in his face. But another part, the tired, aching part, wanted to stop carrying this weight alone. Why help me? I whispered. When you saw me at the hospital, you didn't know I was your daughter. You could have just walked away. Daniel's eyes softened, because you looked like someone who needed help. And because when I saw you, something about you felt familiar, like I'd known you my whole life. When I realized the truth, it made sense. I looked down at Lila, who yawned in my arms. I don't know how to process this, I admitted. I don't know how to be anyone's daughter anymore. And I don't know if I can trust you. Daniel reached across the table, resting his hand palm up between us. Then don't trust me yet. Just let me earn it. The silence stretched, filled only by the soft cooing of Lila. Slowly, I placed my free hand in his, just for a moment, before pulling away to wipe my tears. Okay, I whispered, but we take this slow. From that day forward, something shifted. I started cooking more in Daniel's kitchen, not out of obligation, but because I wanted to contribute. Daniel spent more time at home too, joining me for long talks after dinner about food, life, and all the years we'd missed. Even Ethan began to change. One afternoon, he caught me outside hanging baby clothes to dry. Dad's different, he said awkwardly. He hasn't smiled this much in years. I guess, thank you for that. I smiled faintly. I think we're all figuring things out. Sophie, radiant as always, took to Lila immediately, often swooping in to give me breaks so I could nap or take a walk. She treated me like a sister, something I hadn't realized I'd been craving. At night, after Lila fell asleep, I would stand at the window overlooking the vineyard, breathing in the scent of earth and grapevines. This wasn't the life I'd expected, but maybe it could be the life I needed. Daniel gave me space when I needed it, but he was there, steady, constant, patient. And slowly, the walls I had built for survival began to crack. I stopped feeling like a guest and started feeling home. One evening, as I tucked Lila into her crib, Daniel paused at the doorway. You know, he said quietly, you've brought life back to this house. Not just because of the baby, but because you remind me that family is worth fighting for. For the first time in years, I believed him. It happened on a quiet Saturday morning. I was in the kitchen, kneading dough for the restaurant Project Daniel, and I had started sketching out when I heard the sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway. At first, I thought it was Ethan returning early from town, but when I stepped onto the porch, my heart froze. Jason. He looked thinner, his face pale and drawn, eyes shifting nervously as he climbed out of a beat-up sedan. For a moment, we just stared at each other. The last time I'd seen him, he'd walked out of our apartment without a backward glance. Now here he was, standing on Daniel's property like a ghost from a life I had buried. "Emily," he said, his voice rough, I heard you had the baby. I wanted to see you, to see her." Every muscle in my body tensed. I stepped down one stair, holding the doorframe like it might keep me from falling. "Her name is Lila, and yes, she's here. But why now, Jason? After disappearing? After lying about work? After leaving me at the hospital?" He winced, looking at the ground. "I messed up. I was scared, Em. I thought I couldn't handle being a dad, couldn't handle us. And then I met someone, but it didn't work out. I was stupid, okay? I want to make things right." Behind me, I felt Daniel's presence. He didn't say a word, just stood quietly in support, like a wall I hadn't known I needed. I took a deep breath, steadying my voice. "Jason, I'm not angry anymore, but I'm not the same person you left. I built a life for Lila and me, a better one. You can see her. She deserves to know her father, but you and I, we're done." He looked up, guilt flickering in his eyes. "You're really not coming back?" I shook my head. "No, I'm not." For a moment, he looked like he might argue, but instead he nodded slowly. Can I hold her?" Daniel stepped forward then, his hand resting gently on my shoulder, as if to say, "It's your choice." I nodded and went inside, bringing Lila out. Jason held her awkwardly, tears filling his eyes. "She's beautiful," he whispered. "Yes, she is," I said softly. "And she deserves a father who shows up, not one who runs away." He nodded again, unable to look at me. After a long moment, he handed her back and murmured, "Thank you." Then he left, the sound of tires fading down the drive. I stood there in silence, holding Lila close. Daniel touched my arm gently. "You okay?" I exhaled slowly, feeling something heavy lift from my chest. "Yeah, I think I am." For the first time, I truly meant it. Spring eased into summer, painting the vineyards in rolling green and soft gold. Life in Daniel's house felt different now, lighter, warmer, like someone had opened the windows of a long-closed room and let the sun in. The restaurant project had become real. What started as a few sketches and recipe notes over late-night coffee turned into an actual plan. Daniel even signed the lease on a small space in downtown Portland, and we decided to call it Harvest Soul. The name felt right. Food made from scratch, carrying pieces of my grandmother's recipes and Daniel's long-standing dream of a place that felt like home. On opening night, the dining room was full. The scent of freshly baked bread and rosemary chicken filled the air as I stood behind the counter, Lila sleeping peacefully in a sling against my chest. Daniel stood beside me, his hand warm on my shoulder. "You did this," he whispered. "No," I said softly, glancing at him. "We did this." Across the room, Ethan and Sophie sat together, Sophie's rounded belly visible now that she was expecting their first child. They waved when they saw me, and for the first time I realized I didn't just have a safe place to sleep. I had a family. A few days later, we held Lila's christening in a small white church on the edge of town. Daniel held her proudly, tears shining in his eyes as the pastor poured water gently over her head. My grandmother stood in the front pew, smiling so widely I thought her face might break, and even Ethan's usually serious face softened as he whispered to Sophie, "She's ours now, too." After the ceremony, we gathered at Daniel's house for a small celebration. The table overflowed with food, bread, pies, roast beef, salads from Sophie's garden. People laughed, clinked glasses, and passed Lila around like a precious gift. Later that evening, when the guests had gone and the house was quiet again, I stepped onto the back porch with Lila in my arms. The vineyard stretched out before us, bathed in soft orange light from the setting sun. Daniel joined me, resting one hand on the railing. "You've changed everything around here," he said quietly. "You gave me back something I didn't even know I'd lost." I looked at him, at this man who had once been a stranger but had become something far more profound. "You gave me a family when I didn't have one, and a future I never thought I'd have." Lila stirred against my chest, letting out a soft sigh, and I smiled down at her. "We're home now," I whispered, more to myself than to him. Daniel nodded, his voice low and full of emotion. "Yeah, home." For the first time in a long time, I felt whole. Not because everything had been fixed, but because I'd learned how to build something new from the pieces. And as the sun dipped below the hills, I held my daughter closer, knowing this was only the beginning.